It's the 27th century BCE, at the height of the Roman Empire, and guess what? Your story doesn't start with hope or ambition. Nope, it begins with chains. In ancient Rome, there were about a dozen ways you could find yourself enslaved. The most common? War. One bad battle and suddenly you're not a soldier anymore. You're property. Tens of thousands of captives would be taken in a single campaign. The Romans even had a cheery little saying about it. Every slave we own is an enemy we shelter. Cozy, right? Other unlucky paths to slavery included being sold off by family, dragged into debt, punished for crimes, or even plucked off the coast by pirates. Bottom line, one slip up and boom, your freedom's gone. Slavery wasn't just common in Rome, it was the engine that kept the empire running. For the rich, owning slaves wasn't just practical, it was personal. A status symbol. If you weren't showing off your household staffed by hundreds of people, were you even Roman? So how does this all go down? Enter the slave market. Forget bread or olive oil. This is where people are the goods on display. After being captured, you're handed off to the slave dealers who whisk you away along Rome's intricate trade routes. The industry is chillingly efficient. Seriously, they've got this down to a science. And then comes the auction. You're standing there half naked, a wooden sign hanging around your neck for the world to see. It lists everything about you, your age, where you're from, what skills you have, your value boiled down to a handful of words. Dignity? Not part of the package. For a young captive, it's terrifying. You're surrounded by strangers, your life turned upside down, the weight of this new reality sinking in. One moment you're someone, in the next you're just another thing to be bought. Fear gnaws at you long before survival instincts kick in. And speaking of market value, it's a mixed bag. Are you young, strong, educated? Bonus points if you're Greek. Romans loved Greek slaves. They had a reputation for being smart, even speaking Latin sometimes. If that's you, congrats. You're a premium product. Otherwise, well, good luck. Another way into slavery in Rome? Simple. You're born into it. If your parents are slaves, guess what? You are too. No questions asked. You're known as a verna, or a homeborn slave. Unlike captives hauled in from distant lands, you're raised right there in the household. Familiar faces, a roof over your head, maybe even a few small comforts. Sounds better, right? Well, don't get too comfortable. You're still property, and Roman law makes sure you never forget about it. From the moment you can walk, you're taught the golden rule of survival: loyalty and obedience. Independence? That's not part of the package. Any flicker of rebellion is snuffed out quickly, replaced by the quiet understanding that is your life. Your only life. So what's your day-to-day? That all depends on who owns you and what they need. The worst assignments? Agriculture and mining. Imagine this, you're out on a sprawling plantation under the blazing sun. Sweat pouring down your back as you bend over fields of grain. Your hands are raw, calloused from gripping rough wooden tools, every swing pulling at your muscles that gave up hours ago. Blisters form, then burst, until your hands are a mess of open sores. The day drags on, the sun relentless, and by the time night falls, you're too exhausted to even think. Collapse? Too bad. There's always someone ready to replace you. And then there's mining. If you thought the fields were bad, welcome to the pits. Here you spend your days in suffocating darkness, clawing through rock and dirt in cramped, narrow tunnels. The air's thick with dust, choking your lungs, and every creak of the earth above sends a shiver down your spine. One wrong move, one weak beam, and the entire tunnel could collapse, burying you alive. When you're not working, you sleep chained up, cold iron biting into your skin, just in case the thought of escape crosses your mind. But let's be real, there's no escape. Just endless labor until your body gives out. Now let's say you got lucky. You're a household slave. Sounds like a win, right? Not so fast. Sure, the living conditions are better, cleaner, less backbreaking, but life here has its own set of nightmares. You're always on call, invisible until the moment you're needed, expected to move like clockwork. Banquets, for example, are high-stake events. One misstep with a tray of wine, and you're in for it. And while the work might not destroy your body like the fields or the mines, the emotional toll can be just as heavy. Household slaves aren't immune to abuse, physical, emotional, and yes, sexual. Even in the best conditions, you're constantly walking on a tightrope, watching every word, every movement, because in a world where you're property, safety is always an illusion. Here's what a day in the life of a household slave looks like. The sun isn't even up yet, but you are. Your first task? Lighting the hypocaust, some wealthy Roman's underfloor heating system. Sometimes specialists managed it, but more often than not, it was up to the slaves to keep the fire burning and the family warm. Especially in winter, there was no time to rest, even for the chill. Once the house warms up, it's time to prepare for your master or mistress's day. As soon as they stir, you're there, ready to help them dress. Every pin for their toga, every twist of fabric has to be perfect. From there, the day blurs into an endless list of chores. Cooking, cleaning, fetching, serving, you're everywhere but nowhere. Expected to stay out of sight unless needed. Moving silently like a shadow. When the family bathes, you're there too, drying them off, dressing them again, making sure they're perfectly comfortable. All this, and you haven't even seen midday. If your master is hosting guests, the stakes go even higher. You're expected to glide through the gathering, serving food and wine without a single misstep. A spilled drink, a dropped plate, even the wrong look could earn you a punishment. The pressure's relentless, and the reward? More work. Some slaves have specialized roles, positions that come with both risks and odd perks. Take a progastator, the food taster. It's their job to sample every meal before the master eats, just in case someone had poison on the menu. Dangerous? Absolutely. But on the bright side, you get to eat the same meals as your master, if you survive. Gladiators, meanwhile, are trained for the arena, where they fight for the roaring crowd's amusement. And yes, most gladiators were slaves, but a few were free men drawn in by the lure of fame and fortune. Still, for slaves, the stakes were deadly high. Win and you live another day. Lose and you're just another corpse in the arena. Then there's the law, or lack of it. Slaves aren't citizens, so you're completely at your master's mercy. Educated slaves might fare better, working as tutors or scribes in more respected roles. Big and strong, you might be assigned as a guard or doorman, standing watch at the master's villa. Female slaves, many became nurses caring for their master's children, while Roman mothers considered parenting beneath them. By slave standards, this was a decent position, but let's be real, it's still slavery. And then there's the escape. The spark of hope. Dreaming of freedom feels dangerous. Trying for it? Deadly. Masters feared runaways above all else, and the punishments were nothing short of horrific. If caught, your forehead might be branded with the letters FUG, short for fugitivus, meaning runaway. Worse, you might be forced to wear an iron collar with an inscription, "I have run away, hold me." When you return me to my master, Zoninus, you will receive a gold coin. Life as a Roman slave was ruled by fear. Punishments were brutal and public, designed to make an example of you. For everyday disobedience, beatings or forced labor were more common. But make no mistake, extreme punishments like mutilation or even crucifixion weren't off the table, especially for those who posed a threat to the system. For highly skilled slaves, though, masters often chose punishments that didn't damage their investment. Ironically, the more valuable that you were, the less likely you'd be subjected to extreme punishment. Educated slaves, skilled artisans, or those with rare abilities were worth too much to simply destroy. But make no mistake, your life wasn't yours. Every moment, every breath depended on the whims of someone else. Not every slave accepted their chains. Some fought back, and the most famous of them all, Spartacus. Told you we'd get to him. Spartacus wasn't your typical runaway. No quiet escape under the cover of darkness for him. In 73 BCE, this Thracian gladiator broke free. Not alone, but with about 70 fellow enslaved people. They fled to the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, a natural fortress, and from there they struck back. When Roman forces came to crush them, Spartacus and his group didn't just survive, they won. Word spread like wildfire. At its height, Spartacus's army swelled to an astounding 100,000 people, a number that included not just fighters, but women, children, and others seeking freedom. It wasn't just an army, it was a movement, a community bound by a common dream of shaking off the chains of Roman oppression. Now imagine you're one of those runaway slaves. For the first time, there are no chains binding your wrists, no master's orders hanging over your head. You stand under the open sky, your choices finally your own. You laugh for the first time in years, trading stories with others who've known the same pain, and you dream of a future that belongs to you. The air tastes different, like freedom, like possibility. And even though you know Rome will come for you, that taste is worth everything. But Rome doesn't take rebellion lightly. After a string of humiliating defeats, the Senate had enough. They sent Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of Rome's wealthiest and most ruthless generals, to end the uprising. By 71 BCE, Spartacus's army was overwhelmed. For 6,000 captured rebels, Rome's punishment was nothing short of horrific. Crucifixion along the Appian Way, a bloody road stretching 121 miles from Capua to Rome. travelers couldn't miss the message. This is what happens if you dare to dream of freedom. Spartacus himself fell in battle, his body never found. The rebellion burned bright, but its end was grim. Rebellion, then, wasn't the only path to freedom, just the boldest. The other option? Legal manumission. Rare, but not impossible. A slave could be freed by their master, either as a reward for loyalty or for a price. Domestic slaves, if they were lucky, might save enough to buy their freedom, essentially paying their master back for his investment. But even this freedom came with strings. Even as a free person, your master wasn't quite out of your life. Under Roman law, manumitted slaves often owed their former master operae, a set number of workdays each year. And if you weren't granted manumission, there was one more faint hope: abandonment. If a master decided you were no longer worth the expense, he could cast you out, effectively granting you freedom. But let's face it, slaves were valuable property, and most masters squeezed every last sesterce out of their investment. So what happens after slavery? If you're lucky, you've learned a skill, a trade, a craft, maybe even an artistry. Freed people often use these talents to build a new life. Some became artisans or merchants, earning a decent living. A few even amassed considerable wealth. But no matter how much you've earned or achieved, Roman society never let you forget about your past. The stigma of slavery clung to you like a shadow. As a former slave, you couldn't hold public office or rise to true social prominence. You might escape the chains, but you could never escape the judgment. As the Roman Empire began to falter, so did its grip on the institution of slavery. Fewer slaves were captured in war, and the economy began shifting toward free labor. Slowly, the rigid lines between slave and free began to blur. But equality? That was a dream even Rome's collapse couldn't deliver. Because, in the end, what is freedom if the chains remain invisible?